Well, what's interesting about what you're saying is the perspective, right? Of the revelations that we're getting about how much cover up there was and these possibilities. And one thing that kind of came to my mind several times is how in this point in history, we're closer to nuclear war and nuclear annihilation than we've ever been to World War III. And I personally, and I know people around me, feel a lot of impetus to really have conversations around what we're doing as a humanity with these weapons and all the enrichment that the weapons manufacturers get and the politicians. And one thing that struck me about this, and it might be, to some people listening, they might think this is wacky, but this is kind of something I was thinking, is that, if there were a future generations that were trying to warn the generations before, and that's part of extra-dimensional, because we know time is not the way we perceive it necessarily. And there was a way to harness that back. Maybe it's our great-great-grandchildren coming to tell us too. So some of these sightings might be us in the future if we made it, or us telling us, whatever. So that's one thing.
Absolutely. That comes up in my show a lot, that we have sort of future versions of ourselves. Many of these ET races are sort of offshoot timelines where they've gone through their evolution, going through, genetically modifying their DNA and that kind of thing in order to survive. And they've realized that that was a major mistake. So they're coming back to warn us and to also take genetic material to sort of reboot their own race, because they've gone down such a dark path of genetically modifying themselves almost out of existence, that they, with technology and sort of losing their spiritual and emotional connection to each other and to the world, to Earth.
Because we are at a pivotal moment. AI technology is about to change everything, right? That's what part of the strike is. Like, I'm sure you're watching the strike in Hollywood, which is the first time that both writers and actors are in 40 years have been striking at once. And there's part of the thing that they're striking about is the AI. Writers are worried about AI. I mean, so this is all kind of tied in, isn't it? AI and weapons technology and all of it. We're at this point in history, right? And so I think it's natural that we have these hearings. I wanted to do one thing. Reeve, do you have that brief clip? And then I wanted Reuben to give some feedback from the hearing.
Do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
Yes, and here's why. The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had, and you could put that anywhere. If you had one, you captured one, you reverse engineered it, you got it to work, you're talking something that can go into space, go someplace, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave, and there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
Do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
Yes.
It looped.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, stop it there. Go ahead. There's the fear base. What's your?
That's it. That that is it. And and I understand, coming from a military perspective, you want to eliminate as many unknowns as possible. So having that viewpoint, you're at a disadvantage if you are technically not up to speed for what your so-called adversary or the other person or whatever. So you always want to have that edge, and that's sort of why America has been leading in the world when it comes to its military might, is because it's had quite a bit of reverse engineered technology that it's been able to harness and use, and that's been trickled down through Colonel Corso, and in the 90s came out and was telling everybody about that. But but if you go back to just logic, and get rid of the military mind for a second here, and just think about, okay, if you have a being of that's able to traverse space and time and come here at any time they want and come and go as they please and sort of dance and make circles around our military, and they have been doing this for a long time. If you look at history, and if you look at the which I'm sure David Fravor now, maybe at the time he didn't, but I'm sure now he's been read in on a lot of different cases, the Phoenix Lights case in '97, Roswell, et cetera. We have lots of cases to reference. So if you look at that body of evidence and not just hyper focus on one single event, then you can kind of say, okay, well, these beings, even if you say, I don't know who they are and all that, you're just coming at it from your military perspective. These beings have been coming and going. They haven't taken us out. They haven't destroyed humanity. They, in fact, there's been some nuke tampering, but mostly just that comes along with, they turn it off. They have activated some. They've turned them on to sort of scare people as well. Robert Salas, who was at the citizen hearing, and he talks about his event there that happened in the 1960s, and actually I think the missile silos were activated. They were turned on, and but clearly they weren't launched or anything like that. But later, what you don't see in the news is Bob Salas talks about his contactee experiences. So he was actually contacted, him and his wife in their bed, and were told about the dangers of nuclear weapons and how we should not be playing with matches and we need to be more responsible. So this idea of them being a threat is sort of absurd, because we would have been already taken out. And this idea, what Grush is alluding to and not talking about, and Burchett sort of brought up in his questioning, was around radiation. So it was sort of framed, there have been injuries, there have been soldiers and scientists and people who are near these craft and phenomenon who do have some adverse effects, and it was sort of danced around and sort of presented that bad stuff happens. We've been attacked by these ETs. Well, as far as I know in my research, I think I've heard of one, and I don't have definitive dates and times of this case, but I've heard that we've fired upon them, and most of the time they just ignore it and they go away. But I think there has been a retaliation in one case where and again, I don't have specifics, so I really shouldn't even quote that. But
that's okay.
The collective body of evidence that we have overwhelmingly shows that they are not a threat, and that
it's almost like they're looking at us like we're children. In other words, you and I have talked about this before, about humanity. We're technologically maybe developed, but there's a lack of emotional intelligence. So, and it doesn't mean that we're ignorant. It just means that there's a lack of development with emotional intelligence. It's not caught up to where the technology is. So do you think they do us with that compassion?
Well, I mean, look at our state of affairs. Look at what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. Look at the US, instigating, pushing NATO onto on that whole situation. We're instigating
World War III, essentially. Yeah.
So our leaders, so-called world leaders, are in a constant pushing of war and violence, and in your case, manipulation and lack of transparency. There's just a lot of issues that we have within our current political and social structures of how we operate as human beings. So all of that needs to sort of get cleaned up, and before we can have, real conversations. Just imagine there's a whole, different side of this where religious groups are all calling these beings demons, and that they're entrained to think that they are evil and they're going to, suck our blood and take over humanity.
Some, but Marjorie Taylor Greene came out with a statement the other day where they could be angels.
Right. So progress.
Interesting, kind of different. Oh, I like your cup, by the way. That looks like a Moscow Mule cup.
I did get it from Russia. It is a copper cup. Russians still drink from copper cups, which is actually has tons of health benefits. I'm glad you noticed.
I have it. Okay, so back to
So there is a, we're going to have to change how we, this is the biggest part. This is the biggest positive side, I think, of having this hearings is so many people are going to by decree, not decree, but by default, they're going to have to adjust their worldview. They're going to have to, just like me. And when I had my experience in 2007, I had my experience and I had to start shifting how I perceive the world. And there's a lot of awesome things that come along with that. It's very disruptive to your sort of basic operating system, how you've been operating for, if you've subscribed to a certain religion or belief or whatever it is, for your whole life, it is disruptive, and it can be, game changing, life changing in even in, it may in the moment be perceived as negative because your whole world's getting twisted and turned around. But on a bigger, wider view, you're now able to see things clearer in a more objective state. I don't know. Just having a different perspective on anything, I think, is a good, healthy thing to do. And now collective humanity, especially people who subscribe to government as being the the be all end all voice of how to operate, which most of us are sort of beyond that at this point, but there's still a few people that still trust their government. They now that they're getting this information in that way, then hopefully this will start to open their minds, start to have conversations, and then eventually lead us into the next stage, which is open contact. And how long is that going to take us? I don't know, but we'll get there.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is, and I don't know, like in your research, what you've discovered, but I wonder if there isn't a lot of compassion for. It's almost like we're young children, like humans, because in universe time, we haven't been around very long. And I mean, there might be compassion for our developmental state. And perhaps there's an opportunity with contact to get innovation, ways of thinking, accelerated maturity, and accelerated ways to use energy and to use all kinds of technology to make our lives more full and easier. It's interesting that those conversations don't happen at these hearings, don't you think?
Yes, yes. I'm sure behind the scenes they are happening, and that has sort of been the consensus. If you watch the citizen hearing, all the researchers that have been in this field for, the Richard Dolans and the Linda Moulton Howells and the Stephen Greers, and they've all the late great Stanton Freeman, all of their. They all come to the same conclusion, is that the reason the cover up is continuing as long as it has is basically to keep us entrapped in this energy paradigm. Because as soon as we announce that ETs are real, then everybody has to start questioning, or how are they getting here and there, and there's no heat signatures. That was brought up during the hearings. The David Fravor talked about the heat signatures and from the craft and stuff. So what it does is it's allowing humanity to start having the conversation in a public forum that there's something else moving these things around than our traditional propulsion systems. So that's a big win for even though they didn't really have that conversation publicly, right. But it's a big win for humanity to start getting out of this old idea of how we consume and create energy.